Yeah, that's what I figured. So there they are. You want me to project them? So you advance them, or you want to present them?
Say it again.
You want me to advance them, or you want you to?
You can advance them, I guess.
Okay, I'll stay here. Great. You want to stay out there, or what?
All right, I'll stay out here.
Okay.
Okay, so talk a little bit about tech careers. This is the way I wanted to hear about some things that you could do. My background is in testing. So I'm going to go ahead and one. Okay. I work as a manager of testing right now. So software testing, I think, is this amazing field where you get to find the ways that things can break. It's a bit like security, only maybe a little broader. I don't know. I enjoy the work a great deal. Okay. I started in the college education I have is about 2 years at a 2-year school back in the Midwest. I didn't graduate. I just started working in the field. It's worked out pretty well eventually. It's been pretty good for me. I got this. I've done okay in my field. I got to go to conferences and I talk about stuff. I got to go to some interesting places and meet all kinds of cool people. I'm really happy I found my way into tech. This is about the last 20 years, and I color coded it because these are different companies I worked at. But one of the things I thought I would stress if you haven't worked in tech is it's not about picking a specialty and sticking with it for decades necessarily. There are people who do that. There are also people who try different things out. I definitely couldn't do what I'm doing. Couldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't have some different experiences. All over the place, performance testing. I've been a DBA. I've done sales engineering. I've done implementation, different stuff like that. I put a list of some of the jobs that I had before my mid to late 20s when I fell into tech. Bartending, roofing, bouncing in bars, all kinds of stuff. So it took a while. But the meritocracy is kind of a myth in tech, but I did manage to break through with skill. Yeah. Yes, please. So what I mostly have been doing is working in the software industry. So I want to talk about a couple of the roles here. And then I'm going to drop into a few specifics that might be more relevant to you that you'd be interested in. So I put up data scientist because this is like the top paying job in every job survey. I like to call it statistics done by people who don't know math very well. It basically has to do with looking at very large data sets and trying to find correlations between data points. The greatest minds of the last couple generations have worked very hard to make you slightly more likely to click on ads. That's data science work, to figure out what would appeal to you. A newer field is as a UX designer. So people who are good at who are good at not just the graphic design aspect, but the social sciences aspect of seeing how people interact with software. What's the smallest number of clicks to get you from A to B? What are the things that you expect someone to look for? It's a very interesting field to look into. And then developer. I want to talk about this a lot. Software development is there are people crying for developers all the time. There are billboards over here for people trying to hire developers. It does quite well. And there are different kinds. There's people who, what we used to call web development is now front-end development, where you interact with the JavaScript operating system or the browser to make web pages go slower. Sorry, that was a joke. There's some back-end, or what they call a full-stack developer. Those would be people who are getting data out of a database or focusing on transmitting data from one set of servers to another. And there's a lot of people who work with mobile, phones and tablets and things like that. So there's developer opportunities all over the place. Here's where I work. I work in testing. I say that I examine software to try to find risks to customer value. So that's not just crashes. That's has to do with anything, not just software crashing when you click on a button or not getting the result that you expected. You could just thinking about how software is deployed, and is it going to run well that way? If what kind of load will we put on the system, and will that work well? So that's how I have to kind of sell what I do to people who are making software, that I'm going to protect them from something expensive. This is a newer field. We call it DevOps. People are already complaining of that it's been diluted and doesn't mean a particular thing. It means a particular thing to me. What it means for me is the people who take the output from engineers and guide it through to the point where other people can use it. And that's become a whole thing where people need to write the scripts and the deployment activities to push a button that builds software and then puts it out somewhere. That's kind of a cloud world sort of thing, where I don't know how many AWS nodes are going to run the software, but I have scripts that will help me figure it out, and will deploy those for me and put code on them. And I group this too, I call it an SDET. Those are people that write test automation. This is a thing in software testing where a great deal of focus, particularly in the Bay Area, around testing is about writing code that tests code, which in theory is a pretty good idea.
What does this stand for?
Software development engineer in test. That's Microsoft invented that term about 17, 18 years ago, I think. So people that write test automation or permanent junior class developer pays pretty well. It turns out that software is really bad at noticing things. So the way I teach testing and the way I run my testing organization is people look at software and try to come up with interesting attacks. That sounds a little familiar. And then there's some people around us who help make it, figure out what it is that we want. Product management, I've done a little bit of that. That's not really an entry-level career, but those are the people who talk to customers and refine what that feedback from customers into what we should build. There are people who have spreadsheets and, hey, are we done yet? Why aren't we done yet? What's taking so long? Why aren't we done yet? I mean, that's how our project managers are. And in case you have a master's in English, there is a job for you in tech. You can be a technical writer. That does pretty well. There's the operations part of keeping all this stuff running. This is a pretty if you're interested in how servers work and setting up network gear, go learn how to do all that on Amazon. That's how everything. That's where basically everybody I talk to is what they're dealing with these days. Is cloud infrastructure or moving to cloud infrastructure. There used to be a job called a storage engineer that would administer large arrays of disks in a local office or a local data center, shrinking very fast as more things are being kept on somebody else's servers. Network administrator. So I wasn't sure when I saw what the title of this job was. Is it careers in security? Is it careers in networking? Once upon a time, there were people who would configure network switches and help set up corporate networks. There's still a few of them. There's still networks inside of offices where people go to every day, but it's also kind of headed in this direction. A good number of employees are working from home. They're connecting over wireless. It's not the same game it used to be. And I already talked about DevOps a little bit, so I think we'll move on. Information security analyst. If you can run Burp Suite and explain what the OWASP top 10 is, you can get a job as a security administrator at this point. It's a very quickly growing field. If you look at what the fields are that are growing in tech, this is at the top of those lists. There's huge liability associated with things. With a security breach. I mean, a company like Target is still around, but when they had their big breach 3-4 years ago, they lost billions of dollars in stock value. So when you're looking at costs like that, there's a lot more focus on, can we at least not make any of the stupid mistakes? So so definitely a growth area. I'll talk more about the help desk job in a little bit. I put it here because it's an entry-level job, and a lot of people I know who came through the side door like me, this is where they would get their start. We still have DBAs, database administrators. It requires some fairly precise work, not especially difficult work. It pays pretty well, just don't make any mistakes. And then there's the whole area where you go and get the money. I was a sales engineer for a while. It was really easy. It pays pretty well. It involved basically practicing running the same demo over and over again for customers. So if you have that kind of personality, that's a way into tech companies. You can learn some things that way. And I don't know. Then you have to work with salespeople all the time though. They're implementation engineers. My pithy saying for this is everything that's wrong with the software you have to paper over in your deployment. You write a little custom code or figure out how to convince the customer to use things a little bit differently. Some of the software vendors I work for have something called customer success, where you talk to your customers all the time. Hey, how's it going? Are you using our latest features? And you kind of help them get the value out of what they're doing so they'll keep paying their bill for software. And technical support is a bit like help desk, except it's worse. You have to talk to the public instead of just people who have managed to get employed. So the fog the mirror test is not necessary for someone to call you when you're doing external help desk, but it has to be done. A whole lot of this is going offshore these days, to be honest, but if you've got a smaller company that needs quick feedback on what their customers think, there's still plenty of jobs that are doing this. And web development, which in the mid-90s was something I did and was still kind of new, is now almost like a marketing job now. I mean, a website is a bit like your poster about your company, or it's a catalog. And I make the distinction between that and a front-end engineer where you write an application that customers use. All right, so some general guidance about tech careers is there is no job security, there's only career security. Companies change, companies get bought, companies go out of business, companies have reorgs. The only way that you can be sure to have any security is to continuous learning and to be employable and to be ready to take the next job and to have people want to hire you for your next job. That's really the only way to get any kind of long-term security. There are a few contexts, like maybe working for a college. I'll talk some more about specific contexts. There are a few contexts, the government, the school, the hospital type thing, where maybe you can stay employed for a couple of decades. Most people don't have that kind of security in any industry these days, but especially in tech. Change is relentless. I'm already falling behind the curve. I've spent time like hiring people and doing interviews and management stuff, and I've never run a serverless function. Or Lambda is the Amazon brand name for that. Things are happening constantly, and you have to keep up a good pace of reading and at least following what's going on. It can be too easy in a tech job to go heads down for 3 years and look up and wait, nobody uses this programming language anymore, or this product I'm now an expert on is obsolete and has been replaced by a competitor. And this last thing. It's a pretty common career path to decide whether you're an individual contributor, whether you're a manager. In the short term, being a manager might pay a little bit more, but you lose all your hard skills and you're the first to get fired. Individual contributors can have a steadier career and have an easier time staying employed, has been my experience. I have to say this all the time. There are no best practices. A real expert knows when a tool makes sense and when it doesn't. So I'd like you to be suspicious of. Here's the best practice for this, and here's the best practice for that. There's some value in the policy area, like our education policy. People talk about best practices, and what they mean is a good practice. Every job has soft skill requirements. You have to be able to play well with others. No, the Sheldon from Big Bang Theory persona like only lasts so long. You will wear people out. They will get tired of you. And you have to figure out how to have good skills, in my area of testing, we have to provide criticism and have that go well. So there's a lot of, you did a really good job, but maybe we need to improve a little bit here. And that can always be sort of difficult. Your boss has to like you, your coworkers have to like you. That's how it is. And then back to this point of a little bit earlier about you probably aren't going to do the same thing your whole career. Maybe you will. You might find better opportunities if you let yourself try things you haven't thought of before. And you can come back. A job can last 18 months and you can go back to a field. And take a look around and see what's out there. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some specific jobs. And the thing I want to say about this is I've got some dollars out there trying to tell you what these jobs pay. That's San Francisco money, first of all. I could tell you more about Midwest money if you like. It's lower than that. But then again, so's the rent. I want to tell you more about these specific roles and maybe how you could get prepared for them or think about them as the kind of job you'd like. So I talked about support because this is a really common first job, or first rung. Someone will take a chance on you without a degree or without experience in tech. It pays pretty decently if you haven't been working in tech before. It's not bad. It's very good if you can be patient with people. People know the IT Crowd, the BBC series. Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't be like that guy. Doesn't work. I have an outlook score, like how good how do these jobs look for the next few years. I think the support is always pretty bright. There's so many startups around here, and the developers want to quickly not have to answer the phone, so they will find people who they can train to handle resetting people's passwords, setting up people's accounts, and getting them started. I put DBA, like I said, it's a not horribly demanding job, but it does require some precision. If you can make sure you're never caught without a backup and that your backups restore, you'll be a good DBA. You have to do the work to make sure that you learn your implementation pretty well. The level 2 of DBA is learning how to tune queries for performance. That's a bit of a black art. Each one of these databases works a little bit differently, and you have to spend time with it and learn how they do things. That looks pretty good. People always need to make sure that they have their data, that it's backed up, that they can get to it, that somebody can bring it back if a server crashes or an AWS node crashes or whatever. But yeah, there's a disruption in this space too. There are startups that are storing data for people. So some of that has been moved outside of the company. Operations roles. So this is if you think I'm a network administrator, I'm a server administrator, that's what we called those jobs 10 or 15 years ago, basically making sure everything's running. These days, there's not so much actual SAN running right under your fingertips. It's a lot of virtualization and cloud deployments. Mostly Amazon. I mean, Amazon just is 80-some% of that space, and Google gets a few percent, and everybody else has scraps. The same stuff around supporting networks of computers still applies, though. You have to understand a security model and how to deploy that across many computers. And that's a skill, to learn how to put those things together. How to keep these computers patched up to the right level. So yeah, I think this is still a very good outlook for this one. People have systems where they keep track of their customers. People have systems where they keep track of their payroll. Somebody has to support all this. Now, over time, this is moving into smaller and smaller buckets because of the cloud infrastructure. But the software company I work for is crying for people who can do basic cloud operation stuff. Testing. So this is the field I'm the most into. It's a bit under threat because people want to automate testing, which is not quite the same thing. That'd be like automating teaching. But you can write computer checks that look for a simple thing. Does this screen load after I click on this button? A whole lot of the testing jobs in this area, as I said earlier, are for that kind of testing. They're still the kind of testing I like, with creative thinking and designing experiments and having a hypothesis and can I falsify it. You have to be able to learn very quickly to be effective doing that. Some development skills help a lot. And makes it easier for you to talk to people about how software works. Yes, I don't know. Bright is a little optimism on my part. I talked about the SDET job. This pays a little bit more. I already used my permanent junior developer line, but that's kind of what it is you work next to developers and automate tests of their code. So you spend most of your time developing these automated tests. There's some test design to that. What would be a good check to make sure that the screen is properly loaded? Some of the typical things are, do I see the title of the screen, or does this field turn up, or do I get this result in this field that I expected? And maintaining that all the time, keep you busy. And then last is the developer jobs. I mean, if you wanted to pick a job based on pay and future opportunity, of all the ones I showed you, this is the one with the most pay and the most opportunity. Now, these kinds of numbers, this is like principal architect at Facebook kind of stuff. This is not crazy, though. This is what developers make at most of the new software companies. That's what people have to pay around here to stay in the game. Yeah.
But is that referring like senior? We're talking about like 3 to 5 years of experience in coding.
So this is hard to express a range here, and then again, it's San Francisco based. Let's say that if you're good enough entry level, or you're a couple years in your career and you can demonstrate skill, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah, you could be looking at that. There are people who get that as their first development job.
Another question. Back in the automated testing, Microsoft SQL has SSIS. SQL integration platform.
Yeah, it's usually for moving data from one place to another.
Yeah, and then you can do things like putting up things like fuzzy logic. It just has some logic ability to it.
Mhm.
Have you heard about it? Is there a market for that? Or?
Well, so you're almost talking about a bit like a data scientist skill.
Right.
A few years ago, we called that data warehousing, and people will be trying to normalize large amounts of data from different sources into one data set that you could work with.
Right.
So I think that's more of a DBA type job or a higher end DBA job if you could do that well. That could be tricky though, like, for 10 different systems, all different formats, how do you clean that all up, put it into one system that people can work with? All right, so yeah, this is like the golden ticket, right? It's hard to get through the door. A company like Google, I like to say Google is committed to diversity. They'll hire you whether you have a diploma from Stanford, Harvard, or Yale. You can demonstrate some skill though by working on open source projects. You can set up a GitHub repo and put your code in it. And when people hire developers, that's the kind of thing that they're looking to see. So it is possible to crack through this stuff and knock down a wall. It might take a little time. But as you practice practice this and you start getting some stuff out there, you get some code accepted into some open source repos, it can happen. And there's a lot of other jobs you can use along the way to help you build your skills up. So for example, in testing, half the people that start in testing are gone within 5 years because they've moved to development, they've moved to product management. Again, leave yourself open to trying different things. I was a software developer for a while. I didn't love it because of the staring at the screen for 30 hours every week. It was a lot of concentration, and somebody would pull their chair out, and then it would all fall apart in my head, and I had to start over again. And I found it very difficult. But it is. This, I don't know if this is literally true, but I like to say the most oversubscribed resource is developer hours. Like, there's so much software out there that needs to be written, and a shortage of people who can do it, which is why the pay is so high. Trying to find people who are good enough to do it. Okay, so that's the kinds of jobs, but the definition of the work you do doesn't really tell you everything about what your job would be like. So I have a little section about contexts. So just in my experience at working with software vendors, you're a large software company, an HP, a VMware, a Facebook. They pay pretty well. They have other jobs as you can try stuff out once you get in there. You can meet people who have been doing it for a while who can mentor you, and that's all great. They're also highly political environments. You have the right person has to like you at the right time. Nobody can dislike you too much. It's hard to do new things. If you're really passionate about technology, you usually want to do you usually want to build new things. Nobody goes into tech to build Hello World 50 times and retire. You want to try something new. That can be hard to do at a larger company. The smaller, this middle-sized company, that's where I have the most experiences, where there's a few hundred people, but the founder's still there, and that can be a bit of a hassle. Sometimes people are waiting to get paid, and the company's not as dynamic as it could be. The culture's changing very fast because the people are coming on who are trying, who have a chance, who could lift the company, but there's the cool kids who've been there for a long time. But still, these are good environments. And in the Bay Area, if you work in tech, you can change jobs every 18 months and nobody blinks. In the Midwest, it's more of 3 to 5 years, is my experience. So you just try out some different things and see what you like. I've kind of settled into this area, but I don't know. All right, and then the small startup ones, that's just crazy. Like, yeah, there's this, maybe you're going to win the lottery with this one, but you're probably not. So you can end up working very hard for not that much money for a lot of worthless options. I've done it. I've got some that are not so great. The incentives can be perverse. No, that doesn't mean like perverted. I mean they're focused on getting exposure, on showing a certain number of users rather than making money, because it's a startup world is a little weird that way. It can be hard to find mentors in a situation where everybody's super overworked, a bunch of risk takers, not necessarily people who've been around the block as much. I did do some work. I did work for the state government for a while. There were some good things about that. For one, I felt like I was maybe helping people. Like I worked on a program for giving immunizations to kids. So, it was helping out. The pay was decent. The benefits were good. A lot of days off. Very slow. Some checked out people I had to work with. That was not so great. I wasn't good at politics yet. I should have put politics on here too. I actually wasn't able to stay there. I was asked to leave by irritating the wrong people for too long. Yeah, that will happen. And then, here's some other ones. Some of these I haven't worked in specifically, but when I've been in a customer-facing role where I install stuff or I do consulting for them, I've got a little taste. So healthcare is probably a bit like the slide before this, except they have all the money. So it's kind of nice to get paid well and to have whatever tools you want. But healthcare is also a little scared of technology. There are doctors that still want to write on paper. Insurance companies have more money than healthcare, but they're very slow and very boring and very careful. Good place to learn discipline and to learn your field, but they're not using the latest technology, to say the least. Banking, they actually have less money than insurance, but it's close. Also very risk averse. Good way to use the last decade's technology would be to work at a bank. But still good experience. And then distribution and retail. Actually, I did a lot of work in this area where I was working on the kind of system that like produce wholesalers would use. And those people didn't have a lot of money and didn't really care about technology as long as it worked. So if things worked, they were happy with me, and if they didn't work, then they were mad at me. And I don't know, it's a job. Manufacturing, these have been the people who literally don't care about the tech and actually consider it a burden that they have to deal with it at all. And then one more dimension to talk about is the type of work. So I've been a full-time employee most of my career. I have done some work for, I split this service provider up from full-time. Service provider is when you're rented out to different companies or to solve specific problems for a pool of customers. That's all great as long as they like you. That can be a little weird sometimes, how you get treated in that sort of situation. But it was also good for getting a lot of different experiences. If I was in 6 different companies in a week, I learned, I had 6 different opportunities to see new things and to see how things work. So that actually worked out pretty well. Contracting, a lot of that is the benefit situation is something to think about. Maybe if you have a partner who has benefits, that works out well for you. It pays a little bit more per hour. Not a lot of security though. That's where security is, but the pay is lower. And this last one I want to say about freelancing is I've done freelancing at a couple points in my life. I was not able to handle the irregular pay. It freaked me out a bit too much. It's hard to sell work. It's hard to stay employed continuously. The people I know who are really successful freelancers are still working some fraction of the year. They're not working constantly. And that's been my experience. So if you have the flexibility to be able to do that, it's not so bad. I'm too scared. I want to see 15th and 30th the same amount of money show up every month. Yeah. And that's what I prepared. I was kind of expecting more questions, but I'm happy to have some. Yeah.
Yeah, those sectors you mentioned, which of those would have the most jobs in San Francisco? Healthcare, banking.
It's tough to say. My feeling is that healthcare IT is a little bit smaller than banking IT, like per dollar that exists in that industry, because so much of banking these days is driven by technology systems. And all the banks I've ever worked with have these giant IT companies, a little old school. Whereas, the healthcare systems, I mean, they have they have billing systems, and they have to keep track of benefits for their employees, but it's not key to what they're trying to accomplish as much as it is with banking.
Facebook brags that they hired 10,000 people for security work. I never heard of that. And especially for community college. You never said that.
I wonder what they're calling a security role. Like, are you reviewing applications that are using Facebook? Like, I
I
don't.
thought that's what
One thing they said is they're going to have 10,000 sensors censoring all the posts. That is probably not really what you call security role, but
Well, I never heard of them hiring. That's like bragging, saying, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to follow through that.
So I've been to the offices in Menlo, and I don't believe there's 10,000 people working there. I know they have offices elsewhere in the world. You know, I got friends who work there, and they go to Dublin, and they go to London, and they go to Brazil. But it strains credibility, to say the least.
I would imagine you could do it remote.
Yeah, there's some people who work remotely for them.
But is it true or just like OPS?
Well, back to what Sam said, are there 7,000 of them people sitting at home, like a task rabbit, blocking posts?
That's what I think it is.
Yeah.
Review these pages, see if they said something awful and block it. I think that's what it is. And it's probably gig work, I'm guessing.
They're doing AI too for that.
They tried that and it failed. That's why they said they're going to hire real people.
I think YouTube is hacking the same thing.
I have a quick question. Do you recommend any students who are like finishing up college to get any industry certifications? Like you spoke briefly about AWS, and AWS does their own certifications, so you can be like AWS Cloud Architect or something like that. There's other ones like the CompTIA does the A+, and that's usually what most people use to be a help desk person. But are those kind of useful in getting in through the door?
I think that's what they're useful for, is for getting in through the door. And the most value you get out of them long term is the studying that you did to get the certification. Not so much so you could pass a multiple guess test, but because by the time you were able to pass it, you understood a lot more about the domain. It is a problem in hiring, is that there are HR people who don't know the tech, who are trying to filter resumes somehow, and those are the kinds of things they look for sometimes. I'm a little skeptical about them myself. I've seen people with certifications who aren't great, but it's better than nothing, I guess. It's better than no certification.
Would a degree be better?
I think a degree is better than a certification in a lot of cases.
Like more like a 4-year degree than
Even a 2-year degree means something. Yeah, I was lucky that I got my break in the 90s, when like anybody who knew how to work a mouse could get a job in IT. It's still a growth field. Yeah, so I know a 2-year degree is a lot more work though than a certification. Yeah, I got a few of the Microsoft certifications early on, like MCSC and MCDBA, because at that point I'd been waiting tables 2 years before that, and it was, if I just get the certification, I'm going to have it so made, and it didn't really like change everything for me.
In terms of DevOps, are there industry sectors that are in demand of DevOps engineer firms that you're aware of?
So anybody that writes their own software and has to deploy it, that's the kind of place that needs that skill.
Okay.
So software vendors, particularly the way a lot of software vendors are structured now, where they're putting stuff on the internet for people to interact with. That's the core part of their business. But even a place like a bank, they think they're doing DevOps because they have some practice for getting software deployed.
Now, in terms of long term, with the DevOps, will they always stay around the same developments or even pre-productions? Will they ever go, over the hump of production and or post-production support?
So the thing about post-production support is part of putting things on the cloud is there's a lot more emphasis on monitoring now and kind of seeing what happened and quickly using that from production. I don't know. I'm trying to get back. I'm trying to work my way back to your question, but it used to be that deploying, writing software and deploying it was a bit like launching a mission to Mars. Like, oh, I hope this all works because it will take too long to do it again. And now there are companies that are deploying software hundreds of times a day.
I get it. There's always different phases. But it's something like after phase 1 and phase 2, and then they phase you out, so to speak, like that. and that phase become productions, and I guess perhaps depending on the size of the project, you might, if you're lucky, you stay in DevOps, if you're not lucky,
For the most part, DevOps is about a continuous thing that you're going to use thousands of times to deploy software. Usually you need people to be constantly tinkering with it and keeping it running. I don't really think of it so much as you work for 2 months and then we're done and you can go now. Because things are changing all the time. Someone has to keep those pipelines running.
A question on you're talking about certs. Is the same thing applied to CISSP, do you think? Security.
I don't work in security, so I don't have a good way of judging like exactly how valuable that is. I know that most of the security people I meet have some string of letters after their names. It's probably good to demonstrate some skill and knowledge when you can, when it's reasonable. But in testing, one of the problems we have is there are some testing certifications, and they're not cheap. And there are people in India who are scraping together their family savings to try to get that first testing job, and it doesn't make as much of a difference for them as it could. So I don't know how hard it is to get that particular certification, but if you've already got a lot of the knowledge, it might not be too difficult to just pay a testing fee. I don't know.
When I apply for a job, I send a resume in. How do you get that resume so close to the job? Especially if you got like 100 people doing the same time day. How do you get that resume to get noticed?
Yeah. So there's some good resources for this, but so the stuff that I've been counseled on is put the lists of education and jobs at the bottom, and put your own section at the top full of value that you can provide, and not I know this programming language. It's I can help you build software better because I know this programming language, and it kind of by demonstrating why you're doing it and not just what you can do. I don't know how helpful that is, but also pack it full of buzzwords one way or another, because all the online scanning systems are doing keyword matching. So if you do have a skill, make sure that the word that describes it is somewhere on your resume, because then it will come up when when I have testing openings, I get hundreds of resumes. So I have a couple of specific keywords I look for. So I'm already throwing like 90% of them away, and it's unfortunate, but I can't read all the resumes though either. Oh, and no grammar errors, no spelling errors. Those are easy rejects. Like, hey, you're trying to convince me that you're really focused and you can do a good job, but you couldn't do a spell check. So get someone to look at it for you and give it a once over probably.
Are any companies using that to give you a piece of work to do, piecemeal it as a test to see how well you do your job? It's not articles.
I see that a lot more with programming, where they try to give you a programming test. I mean, some of the programming tests though are really kind of lame. Like there's the interviewer heard of the FizzBuzz test. Someone says, okay, I'm going to give you a list of numbers from 1 to 50. I need you to write a program that says if it's divisible by 3, say fizz. It's divisible by 5, say buzz. If it's divisible by both, say FizzBuzz. And it's supposed to be like some simple check if you understand something called set theory, which by the way, I couldn't pass that test. I have failed to pass that test. But my joke is, boy, I sure hope that person can add value down at the FizzBuzz factory by doing this real simple kind of programming test. Sometimes they'll give you a real programming problem to work on, but by the time it's something you can complete during an interview, it's probably pretty boring. It's probably something very tiny. Other fields, sometimes they'll give you some real work to look at. In my testing interviews, I have software I ask people to test in front of me. Not so much because I'm going to see, did you find every bug? But I want to see like how they go about it, how they tell me what bugs they found. And that's an important skill.
Yeah, I did. When I applied online for program, and they tell you online, they had these 2 programs they wanted you to write completely into that. and you do it online, and it has to be, the program ran at efficiency. And maybe like,
Oh, well, I'd fail. I have heard about that, and then my question has always been, you know, are the solutions really so trivial that they can be easily checked by an online system?
the thing is, I did okay in the program, but the efficiency was really low. So then it just,
You said efficiency. They're probably maybe like counting lines.
no, efficiency and speed.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah. That's the kind of experience you kind of get from doing it a bunch of times. And there are ways you can instrument your code. How long is this taking? It may be a good learning opportunity to say, okay, that was slow. How could I have made it faster?
So what are the interviews like in your line of work?
So that starts out with, there's some resume review process. Usually an HR person picks out the resumes. Sometimes I pick out the resumes. And the HR person calls them and they have a conversation in 30 minutes or so. They figure out, like, can you communicate coherently and things like that. They call it the first screening or a phone screening. If they still like you, then you go to the hiring manager and you have another 30-45 minute phone conversation. If that goes well, the next step is an on-site interview. So it's for us, it's typically 2 or 3 hours. 4 different people will interview you. I try to usually get like a developer that you would work with, and there's the hiring manager, and then maybe a peer, and then somebody else. And then they each spend 30 or 45 minutes with you doing their own thing, and then afterwards they talk about it. Like, do we like this person? Can they do the job? It probably takes, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks start to finish.
What kind of skill set are you looking for testers to start if they don't have experience before? Have you actually hired people without experience in testing before?
I have hired people without experience in testing before. The job I have, the place I work right now, it would be harder for me to do, I think. It has a little bit to do with the context stuff about where I work. Like, it's kind of corporate, and I could probably get away with it. Like, we're talking about, should we have an associate entry-level type testing position? But I guess the thing that I'm always looking for in a testing interview is for someone to make me go, oh, like, tell me something about testing, or tell me about how they think about software in a way that's interesting. Like, it gets super boring to hear the same answers all the time. So the really interesting people are insightful. I don't know. It makes it sound, I don't know, it sounds a bit like a dating game thing, but it sort of is. Like, do we get along? Are we thinking on the same wavelength or not? Or are you boring? And then, not so much.
What's an answer you found insightful that made you go, oh, during the interview?
So I give people these testing problems, right? So one of them I gave was, I opened up the bon, you know what banchan is? The Korean fried chicken place.
Oh.
It's awesome. So there was one that was going to open up in Mountain View, and I'm like, oh, well, I've been hearing about this. I want to try it out. And I open up my app, and something about its Google Maps implementation was wrong. Like, every distance it was showing me was way, way off. So I took a screenshot of this, and I send it to people. Like, I'd be on the phone with them, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to email you something right now. I'd send them this photo, and I'd ask them to tell me, so what do you think's going on here? And if they had ideas about where that came from, even if they were wrong, that's what I wanted to hear. Like, well, I don't know. Well, maybe there's something wrong with the database. Well, it's a geolocation thing. It's probably not a database, but I don't care about that. The fact that you're thinking around the problem and trying to diagnose what could be what's going on. If they say, oh yeah, it's Maps and it's Google, I'm like, okay, well, what should we do about that? And they say, I guess Google has to fix it. That's not a match. Is that an example, or?
Sure.
Yeah. Any more?
Over there.
Hi.
What would be an insight?
Oh yeah. So what would be an insightful answer to the previous one? So this is, I send you a screenshot. It says, here are the 3 closest stores, and one of them's in Texas, and it's 600 miles away. Here's one in Stockton, and it's 620 miles away. So what an insightful answer might be, I might say, well, how do you know that these are wrong? And that's a real easy one. Someone says, oh, I open up a browser and I go to Google Maps and I see how far these things are. Because that's in testing, we call that concept an oracle. I find some source of truth that I can compare my results to and decide whether or not it's fake, or whether or not they're real. So that would be another example. If somebody had thought of a way that they could test what they were against what they were seeing. Not just tell me what the bugs are, but tell me a little bit more about how we might quantify them and how we might fix them. I don't use that test anymore, by the way, but you're welcome to apply all the same.
Okay. Well, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
A couple of administrative things. Make sure you put your name on that thing. So I know you get your credit. And also, there's a job fair coming up next week. If you are looking for a job, right here on May 1, there'll be another different bunch of employers here. So that's at 4 o'clock on Tuesday. So come to that if you want a job. And there's a poster here with more information about it, and it's on the wall outside. So bring resumes.
And that's for actual jobs, not insurance, right?
Both. Some are paid and some are unpaid. Yeah. And some of these people will be there in person, and some will just have descriptions, and we'll be collecting resumes to pass on them. But there will be opportunities in these companies. Yeah.
Like a bad thing.
What's that?
No, I was just making sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna turn to this. Department section.
Which one?
Department
Building.
we check plans. For any building inspection.
Yeah, building construction. Okay.
Inspection.
If you permitting for the city.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Forecast.
Yeah.
I just have to. I said, when I turned up, they paid me $27.
Well, that's pretty good. Yeah. That's good. Right here.
They
Okay.
should say we'll program for SF friends, not for food.
Yeah.
Because food is usually provided by company.
All right.